major selling points of that wholly remarkable travel book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, apart from its relative cheapness and the fact that it has the words "Don't Panic" written in large friendly letters on its cover, is its compendious and occasionally accurate glossary. The statistics relating to the geosocial nature of the universe, for instance, are deftly set out between pages 938,324 and 938,326, and the simplistic style in which they are written is partly explained by the fact that the editors, having to meet a publishing deadline, copied the information off the back of a packet of breakfast cereal, hastily embroidering it with a few footnotes in order to avoid prosecution under the incomprehensibly torturous galactic copyright laws. It's interesting to note that a later and wilier editor sent the book backward in time through a temporal warp and then successfully sued the breakfast cereal company for infringement of the same laws. Here is a sample. The universe. Some information to help you live in it. Area. Infinite. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy offers this definition of the word infinite. Bigger than the biggest thing ever and then some. Much bigger than that, in fact. Really amazing, immense, a totally stunning size, real wow, that's big time. Infinity is just so big that by comparison, bigness itself looks really titchy. Gigantic multiplied by colossal multiplied by staggeringly huge is the sort of concept we're trying to get across here. Imports. None. It is impossible to import things into an infinite area, there being no outside to import things in from. Exports. None. See imports. Population. None. It is known that there are an infinite number of worlds simply because there is an infinite amount of space for them to be in. However, not every one of them is inhabited. Therefore, there must be a finite number of inhabited worlds. Any finite number divided by infinity is as near to nothing as makes no odds, so the average population of all the planets in the universe can be said to be 0. From this, it follows that the population of the whole universe is also 0, and that any people you may meet from time to time are merely the products of a deranged imagination. Monetary units. None. In fact, there are three freely convertible currencies in the galaxy, but none of them count. The Altarian dollar has recently collapsed, the Flanian pobble bead is only exchangeable for other Flanian pobble beads, and the Triganic poo has its own very special problems. Its exchange rate of 8 ninjis to 1 poo is simple enough, but since a ninji is a triangular rubber coin 6,800 miles wide along each side, no one has ever collected enough to own 1 poo. Ninjis are not negotiable currency because the Galactabanks refuse to deal in fiddling small change. From this very basic premise, it is very simple to prove that the Galactic Banks are also the product of a deranged imagination. Art. None. The function of art is to hold the mirror up to nature, and there simply isn't a mirror big enough. See point 1. Sex. None. Well, in fact, there is an awful lot of this, largely because of the total lack of money, trade, banks, art, or anything else that might keep all the non-existent people of the universe occupied. However, it is not really worth embarking on a long discussion of it now because it is really terribly complicated. For further information, see Guide Chapters 7, 9, 10, 11, 14, 16, 17, 19, 21 to 84 inclusive, and in fact, most of the rest of the guide. The restaurant continued existing, but everything else had stopped. Temporal elastics held it and protected it in a nothingness that wasn't merely a vacuum, it was simply nothing. There was nothing in which a vacuum could be said to exist. The force-shielded dome had once again been rendered opaque, the party was over, the diners were leaving, Zarquan had vanished along with the rest of the universe, the time turbines were preparing to pull the restaurant back across the brink of time in readiness for the lunch sitting, and Max Quarterpleen was back in his small curtained dressing room trying to raise his agent on the tempophone. In the parking lot stood the black ship, closed and silent. Into the parking lot came the late Mr. Hot Black Desiato, propelled along the moving catwalk by his bodyguard. They descended into one of the tubes. As they approached the limo ship, a hatchway swung down from its side, engaged the wheels of the wheelchair, and drew it inside. The bodyguard followed, and having seen his boss safely connected up to his death support system, moved up to the small cockpit. Here he operated the remote control system, which activated the autopilot in the black ship lying next to the limo, thus causing great relief to Zaphod Beeblebrox, who had been trying to start the thing for over 10 minutes. The black ship glided smoothly forward out of its bay, turned and moved down to the central causeway swiftly and quietly. At the end, it accelerated rapidly, flung itself into the temporal launch chamber, and began the long journey back into the distant past. The Milloway's lunch menu quotes, by permission, a passage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The passage is this: "The history of every major galactic civilization tends to pass through three distinct and recognizable phases, those of survival, inquiry, and sophistication, otherwise known as the how, why, and where phases. For instance, the first phase is characterized by the question, how can we eat? The second by the question, why do we eat? And the third by the question, where shall we have lunch?" The menu goes on to suggest that Milloway's, the restaurant at the end of the universe, would be a very agreeable and sophisticated answer to that third question. What it doesn't go on to say is that though it will usually take a large civilization many thousands of years to pass through the how, why, and where phases, small social groupings under stressful conditions can pass through them with extreme rapidity. "How are we doing?" said Arthur Dent. "Badly," said Ford Prefect. "Where are we going?" said Trillian. "I don't know," said Zaphod Beeblebrox. "Why not?" demanded Arthur Dent. "Shut up," suggested Zaphod and Ford Prefect. "Basically, what you're trying to say," said Arthur Dent, ignoring the suggestion, "is that we're out of control." The ship was rocking and swaying sickeningly as Ford and Zaphod tried to wrest control from the autopilot. The engines howled and whined like tired children in a supermarket. "It's the wild color scheme that freaks me," said Zaphod, whose love affair with this ship had lasted almost 3 minutes into the flight. "Every time you try to operate one of these weird black controls that are labeled in black on a black background, a little black light lights up black to let you know you've done it. What is this? Some sort of galactic hyperhearse?" The walls of the swaying cabin were also black, the ceiling was black, the seats, which were rudimentary since the only important trip this ship was designed for was supposed to be unmanned, were black, the control panel was black, the instruments were black, the little screws that held them in place were black, the thin, tufted nylon floor covering was black, and when they had lifted up a corner of it, they did discover that the foam underlay also was black. "Perhaps whoever designed it had eyes that responded to different wavelengths," offered Trillian. "Or didn't have much imagination," muttered Arthur. "Perhaps," said Marvin. "He was feeling very depressed." In fact, though they weren't to know it, the decor had been chosen in honor of its owner's sad, lamented, and tax-deductible condition. The ship gave a particularly sickeningly lurch. "Take it easy," pleaded Arthur. "You're making me space sick." "Time sick," said Ford. "We're plummeting backward through time." "Thank you," said Arthur. "Now I am really going to be ill." "Go ahead," said Zaphod. "We can do with a little color about the place." "This is meant to be polite after-dinner conversation, isn't it?" snapped Arthur. Zaphod left the controls to Ford to figure out and lurched over to Arthur. "Look, Earthman," he said angrily, "you've got a job to do, right? The question to the ultimate answer, right?" "What, that thing?" said Arthur. "I thought we'd forgotten about that." "Not me, baby. Like the mice said, it's worth a lot of money in the right quarters, and it's all locked up in that head thing of yours." "Yes, but nothing. Think about it. The meaning of life. We get our fingers on that, we can hold every shrink in the galaxy up to ransom, and that's worth a bundle. I own mine a mint." Arthur took a deep breath without much enthusiasm. "All right," he said, "but where do we start? How should I know? They say the ultimate answer of whatever is 42. How am I supposed to know what the question is? It could be anything. I mean, what's 6 times 7? Zaphod looked at him hard for a moment. Then his eyes blazed with excitement. 42! He cried. Arthur wiped his palm across his forehead. "Yes," he said patiently, "I know that." Zaphod's faces fell. I'm just saying the question could be anything at all, said Arthur, and I don't see how I meant to know. Because, hissed Zaphod, you were there when your planet did the big firework. We have a thing on Earth, corrected Zaphod, called it tact. Oh, never mind, look, I just don't know. A low voice echoed dully around the cabin. I know, said Martin. Ford called out from the controls he was still fighting a losing battle with. Stay out of this, Marvin, he said. This is organism talk. It's printed in the Earthman's brainwave patterns, continued Marvin, but I don't suppose you'll be very interested in knowing that. You mean, said Arthur, you mean you can see into my mind? Yes, said Marvin. Arthur stared in astonishment. And, he said, it amazes me how you can manage to live in anything that small. Ah, said Arthur, abuse. Yes, confirmed Martin. Ignore him, said Zaphod. He's only making it up. Making it up, said Marvin, swiveling his head in a parody of astonishment. Why should I want to make anything up? Life's bad enough as it is without wanting to invent any more of it. Marvin, said Trillian in the gentle, kindly voice that only she was still capable of assuming in talking to this misbegotten creature, if you knew all along, why didn't you tell us? Marvin's head swiveled back to her. You didn't ask, he said simply. Well, we're asking you now, Metal Man, said Ford, turning round to look at him. At that moment, the ship suddenly stopped rocking and swaying. The energy pitch settled down to a gentle hum. Hey, Ford, said Zaphod, that sounds good. Have you worked out the controls on this boat? No, said Ford, I just stopped fiddling with them. I reckon we just go to wherever this ship is going and get off it fast. Yeah, right, said Zaphod. I could tell you weren't really interested, murmured Marvin to himself, and slumped into a corner and switched himself off. Trouble is, said Ford, that the one instrument in this whole ship that is giving any reading is worrying me. If it's what I think it is, and if it's saying what I think it's saying, then we've already gone too far back into the past, maybe as much as 2 million years before our own time. Zaphod shrugged. Time is bonk. I wonder whose ship this belongs to anyway, said Arthur. Me, said Zaphod. No, who it really belongs to. Really, me, insisted Zaphod. Look, property is theft, right? Therefore, theft is property. Therefore, this ship is mine, okay? Tell the ship that, said Arthur. Zaphod strode over to the console. Ship, he said, banging on the panels. This is your new owner speaking to... He got no further. Several things happened at once. The ship dropped out of time travel mode and re-emerged into real space. All the controls on the console, which had been shut down for the time trip, now lit up. A large vision screen above the console winked into life, revealing a wide starscape and a single very large sun dead ahead of them. None of these things, however, were responsible for the fact that Zaphod was at this very same moment hurled bodily backward against the rear of the cabin, as were all of the others. They were hurled back by a single thunderous clasp of noise that thudded out of the monitor speakers surrounding the vision screen. Down on the dry, red world of Kakrafoon in the middle of the vast, rudlit desert, the stage technicians were testing the sound system. That is to say, the sound system was in the desert, not the sound system was in the desert, not the technicians. They had retreated to the safety of Disaster Area's giant control ship, which hung in orbit some 400 miles above the surface of the planet, and they were testing the sound from there. Anyone within 5 miles of the speaker silos wouldn't have survived the tuning up. If Arthur Dent had been within 5 miles of the speaker silos, then his expiring thought would have been that in both size and shape, the sound rig closely resembled Manhattan. Risen out of the silos, the neutron phase speaker I am so sorry, people. Risen out of the silos, the neutron phase speaker stacks towered monstrously against the sky, obscuring the banks of plutonium reactors and seismic amps behind them. Buried deep in concrete bunkers beneath the city of speakers lay the instruments that the musicians would control from their ship, the massive photon agitator, the bass detonator, and the mega bang drum complex. It was going to be a noisy show. Aboard the giant control ship, all was activity and bustle. Hot Black Desiato's limo ship, a mere tadpole beside it, had arrived and docked, and the lamented gentleman was being transported down to the high-vaulted corridors to meet the medium who was going to interpret his psychic impulses onto the agitator keyboard. A doctor, a logician, and a marine biologist had also just arrived, flown in at phenomenal expense from Maximegalon to try and reason with the lead singer, who had locked himself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills and was refusing to come out till it could be proved conclusively to him that he wasn't a fish. The bass player was busy machine gunning his bedroom, and the drummer was nowhere on board. Frantic inquiries led to the discovery that he was standing on a beach on Santraginius 5, over 100 light years away, where he claimed he had been happy for over half an hour now, and he had found a small stone that would be his friend. The band's manager was profoundly relieved. It meant that for the 17th time on this tour, the drums would be played by a robot, and that therefore the timing of the symbolistics would be right. The sub-ether was buzzing with the communications of the stage technicians testing the speaker channels, and it was this that was being relayed to the interior of the black ship. Okay. Its dazed occupants lay against the back wall of the cabin and listened to the voices on the monitor speakers. "Okay, channel 9 on power," said a voice. "Testing channel 15. Another thumping crack of noise walloped through the ship. "Channel 15 okay," said another voice. A third voice cut in. "The black stunt ship is now in position," it said. "It's looking good. Gonna be a great sun dive. Stage computer online?" The computer voice answered. "Online," it said. "Take control of the black ship." "Black ship locked into trajectory program, on standby. Testing channel 20. Zaphod leaped across the cabin and switched frequencies on the sub-ether receiver before the next mind-pulverizing noise hit them. He stood there quivering. "What," said Trillian in a small, quiet voice, "does sundive mean?" "It means," said Marvin, "that the ship is going to dive into the sun. Sun dive. It's very simple to understand. What do you expect if you steal Hot Black Desiato's stunt ship?" "How do you know," said Zaphod in a voice that would make a vegan snow lizard feel chilly, "that this is Hot Black Desiato's stunt ship?" "Simple," said Marvin. "I parked it for him." "Then why didn't you tell us?" "You said you wanted excitement and adventure and really wild things." "This is awful," said Arthur unnecessarily in the pause which followed. "That's what I said," confirmed Marvin. On a different frequency, the sub-ether receiver had picked up a public broadcast which now echoed across the cabin. "Fine weather for the concert here this afternoon. I'm standing here in front of the stage," the reporter lied, "in the middle of the roadlit desert, and with the aid of hyperbinopic glasses, I could just make out the huge audience cowering there on the horizon all around me. Behind me, the speaker stacks rise like a sheer cliff face, and high above me, the sun is shining away and doesn't know what's going to hit it. The environmentalist lobby do know what's going to hit it, and they claim the concert will cause earthquakes, tidal waves, hurricanes, irreparable damage to the atmosphere, and all the usual things that environmentalists usually go on about. But I've just had a report that a representative of disaster area met with the environmentalists at lunchtime and had them all shot. So nothing now lies in the way of..." Zaphod switched it off. He turned to Ford. "You know what I'm thinking?" he said. "I think so," said Ford. "Tell me what you think I'm thinking." "I think you're thinking it's time we got off this ship." "I think you're right," said Zaphod. "I think you're right," said Ford. "How?" said Arthur. Quiet, said Ford and Zaphod. We're thinking. So this is it, said Arthur. Well, we're going to die. I wish you'd stop saying that, said Ford. It's worth repeating at this point that the theories that Ford had come up with on his first encounter with human beings to account for their very peculiar habit of continually stating and restating the very, very obvious, as in, it's a nice day, or you're very tall, or so this is it, we're going to die. His first theory was that if human beings didn't keep exercising their lips, their mouths probably shriveled up. After a few months of observation, he had come up with a second theory, which was this. If human beings don't keep exercising their lips, their brains start working. In fact, this second theory is more literally true of the Besselbron people of Krakafoon. The Besselbron people used to cause great resentment and insecurity among neighboring races by being one of the most enlightened, accomplished, and above all, quiet civilizations in the galaxy. As a punishment for this behavior, which was held to be offensively self-righteous and provocative, a galactic tribunal inflicted on them that most cruel of all social diseases, telepathy. Consequently, in order to prevent themselves broadcasting every slightest thought that crosses their minds to anyone within a 5-mile radius, they now have to talk very loudly and continuously about the weather, their little aches and pains, the match this afternoon, and what a noisy place Krakafoon has suddenly become. Another method of temporarily blotting out their minds is to play host to a disaster area concert. The timing of the concert was critical. The ship had to begin its dive before the concert began in order to hit the sun 6 minutes and 37 seconds before the climax of the song to which it related, so that the light of the solar flares had time to travel out to Krakafoon. The ship had already been diving for several minutes by the time that Ford Prefect had completed his search of the other compartments of the black ship. He burst back into the cabin. The sun of Krakafoon loomed terrifyingly large on the vision screen, its blazing white inferno of fusing hydrogen nuclei growing moment by moment as the ship plunged onward, unheeding the thumping and banging of Zaphod's hands on the control panel. Arthur and Trillian had the fixed expressions of rabbits on a night road who think the best way of dealing with the approaching headlights is to stare them out. Zaphod spun around, wild-eyed. "Ford," he said, "how many escape capsules are there?" "None," said Ford. Zaphod gibbered. "Did you count them?" he yelled. "Twice," said Ford. "Did you manage to raise the stage crew on the radio?" "Yeah," said Zaphod. "I said there were a whole bunch of people on board, and then said to say hi to everybody." Ford goggled. "Didn't you tell them who that you were?" "Oh yeah, they said it was a great honor. That and something about a restaurant bill and my executors." Ford pushed Arthur aside roughly and leaned forward over the control panel. "Does none of this function?" he said savagely. "All overridden. Smash the autopilot. Find it first. Nothing connects." There was a moment's cold silence. Arthur was stumbling around the back of the cabin. He stopped suddenly. "Incidentally," he said, "what does teleport mean?" Another moment passed. Slowly the others turned to face him. "Probably the wrong moment to ask," said Arthur. "It's just, I remember hearing you use the word a short while ago, and I only bring it up because..." "Where said Ford Prefect quietly, "does it say teleport?" "Well, just over here, in fact," said Arthur, pointing at a dark control box in the rear of the cabin, just under the word emergency, above the word system, and beside the sign saying out of order. In the pandemonium that instantly followed, the only action to follow was that of Ford Prefect lunging across the cabin to the small black box that Arthur had indicated and stabbing repeatedly at the single small black box set into it. A 6-foot square panel slid open beside it, revealing a compartment which resembled a multiple shower unit that had found a new function in life as an electrician's junk store. Half-finished wiring hung from the ceiling, a jumble of abandoned components lay strewn on the floor, and the programming panel lolled out of the cavity in the wall into which it should have been secured. A junior disaster area accountant, visiting the shipyard where the ship was being constructed, had demanded to know of the works foreman why the hell they were fitting an extremely expensive teleport into a ship which had only one important journey to make, and that unmanned. The foreman had explained that the teleport was available at a 10% discount, and the accountant had explained that this was immaterial. The foreman had explained that it was the finest, most powerful, and sophisticated teleport that money could buy, and the accountant had explained that the money did not wish to buy it. The foreman had explained that people would still need to enter and leave the ship, and the accountant had explained that the ship sported a perfectly serviceable door. The foreman had explained that the accountant could go and boil his head, and the accountant had explained to the foreman that the thing of putting him rapidly on his left was a knuckle sandwich. After the explanations had been concluded, work was discontinued on the teleport, which subsequently passed unnoticed on the invoice as Sund Explains at 5 times the price. Hell's donkeys, muttered Zaphod as he and Ford attempted to sort through the tangle of wiring. After a moment or so, Ford told him to stand back. He tossed a coin into the teleport and jiggled a switch on the lolling control panel. With a crackle and spit of light, the coin vanished. That much of it works, said Ford. However, there is no guidance system. A matter transference teleport with no guidance programming could put you, well, anywhere. The son of Kakrafoon loomed huge on the screen. Who cares, said Zaphod. We go where we go. And, said Ford, there is no auto system. We couldn't all go. Someone would have to stay here and operate it. A solemn moment shuffled past. The sun loomed larger and larger. Hey, Marvin, kid, said Zaphod brightly. How you doing? Very badly, I suspect, muttered Marvin. A shortish while later, the concert on Kakrafoon reached an unexpected climax. The black ship with its single morose occupant had plunged on schedule into the nuclear furnace of the sun. Massive solar flares licked out from its millions of miles into space, thrilling and in a few cases spilling the dozen or so flare riders who had been coasting close to the surface of the sun in anticipation of the moment. Moments before the flare light reached Kakrafoon, the pounding desert cracked along a deep fault line. A huge and hitherto undetected underground river, lying far beneath the surface, gushed to the surface, to be followed seconds later by the eruptions of millions of tons of boiling lava that flowed hundreds of feet into the air, instantaneously vaporizing the river both above and below the surface in an explosion that echoed to the far side of the world and back again. Those very few who witnessed the event and survived swear that the whole 100,000 square miles of the desert rose into the air like a mile-thick pancake, flipped itself over, and fell back down. At that precise moment, the solar radiation from the flares filtered through the clouds of vaporized water and struck the ground. A year later, the 100,000 square mile desert was thick with flowers. The structure of the atmosphere around the planet was subtly altered. The sun blazed less harshly in the summer, the cold bit less bitterly in the winter, pleasant rain fell more often, and slowly the desert world of Kakrafoon became a paradise. Even the telepathic power with which the people of Kakrafoon had been cursed was permanently dispersed by the force of the explosion. A spokesman for Disaster Area, the one who had had all the environmentalists shot, was later quoted as saying that it had been a good gig. Many people spoke movingly of the healing powers of music. A few skeptical scientists examined the records of the events more closely and claimed that they had discovered faint vestiges of a vast artificially induced improbability field drifting in from a nearby region of space.